$683. That's what was left in my daughter-in-law's checking account 3 weeks after she burned through $700,000, and somehow I was the villain of the story for not handing her my house too. I'm Ryan Foster, 58 years old, Atlanta born and raised, and up until that spring I would have told you the worst thing that ever happened in my family was the time my son Pierce wrecked my truck at 16. I would have been wrong. Dead wrong. Looking back, the warning signs were already flashing red. I just refused to see them. Welcome back to Dad's Sweet Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, every villain in these stories thought they were the smartest person in the room. They were not. Subscribe so you never miss a story. Here's where it starts. Pierce and his wife Madison had a nice place out in Alpharetta. 4 bedrooms, a pool, the kind of house that takes 2 incomes and good credit to hold on to. Allison, my wife of 31 years, and I had helped them get into that house. More on that later. For now, just know we'd been proud of them. Proud the way parents are proud when their kid seems to have it together. Then one Tuesday in March, Pierce called me from the driveway of that house. "Dad, we sold it," he said. Just like that, no warning. Sold what? The house. Closed this morning. I remember standing in my kitchen with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand. "Pierce, you didn't say a word about selling. Where are you supposed to live?" "That's actually why I'm calling," he said, and something in his voice made the hair on my arms stand up. "Madison and I were thinking, just for a little while we could stay with you and Mum." I should have said no right then. I didn't. That was my first mistake. "Sure," I said. "Family helps family. How long's a little while?" There was a pause I'd think about 100 times in the weeks that followed. "We'll figure it out," he said. What I failed to realize at the moment was that Madison had already spent more of that sale money than most people make in 10 years, and she wasn't close to done. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the backstory. 8 years before any of this, when Pierce was 24 and engaged to Madison, Allison and I did something we'd never tell most people about, because it sounds like bragging, and we're not bragging people. We set up a trust for Pierce. Nothing crazy, we'd been smart with money. Sold a small commercial property Allison's father left us, and we wanted our son to have a foundation instead of student loan debt hanging over his head for the rest of his life. The trust was supposed to vest in stages, a chunk at 30, the rest at 40, assuming nothing went sideways. But when Pierce and Madison wanted to buy that house in Alpharetta, they came to us asking for an early advance against it, $700,000, pulled out early, structured as a loan against his future inheritance, so the rest of the trust would simply pay itself down over the years instead of them writing a check every month. Our trust attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Kimberly, who'd been managing our family's finances since before Pierce could drive, set the whole thing up properly. Irrevocable trust, clearly documented loan against corpus structure, the works. And buried in there, on page 11 of a document nobody reads past the signature line, was a standard protective clause Kimberly insisted on for every family trust she wrote. In the event any beneficiary, or the spouse of any beneficiary, commits an act of physical violence against a grantor of this trust, all unvested and unpaid distributions shall immediately and irrevocably terminate, with said funds reverting to the trust's named contingent beneficiary. I remember Kimberly explaining it to us in her office on Peachtree Street, very matter of fact. "It's protection," she'd said. "You'd be shocked how money changes people. This clause makes sure nobody ever has a financial reason to put their hands on you." At the time, it felt almost insulting to even discuss. Like buying a fire extinguisher for a kitchen you swore you'd never burn down. As it turned out, we were going to need that fire extinguisher sooner than anyone could have predicted. Back to March. Pierce and Madison moved their stuff into our guest house, a converted garage apartment behind our place in Sandy Springs, just for a little while. Within a week I noticed things. New furniture showing up at the guest house. A car I didn't recognize in the driveway turned out to be a leased Range Rover. Madison posting pictures online from a trip to Turks and Caicos that I definitely hadn't been told about. I sat Pierce down on the back porch one evening, just the two of us, the Atlanta humidity thick enough to chew. "Son," Where's the money from the house sale? He wouldn't look at me. It's going. Going where? $700,000 doesn't just go. Pierce. Madison's been handling some things. Investments, some renovations on a house you don't own anymore? He didn't answer that one. I want to be clear about something. I love my son. I love him the uncomplicated way you love somebody you've known since the day they were born. Screaming and furious at the world. But love doesn't mean blind, and it sure doesn't mean stupid. I need you to talk to her, I said. Whatever's happening, it needs to stop. It's her money too, Dad. It was house money. It was supposed to be your future. He stood up so fast his chair scraped against the porch boards. You don't get to lecture us about money. You and Mom have always had it easy. I let that one go. I shouldn't have. I should have called Kimberly that night. Instead, I told myself it was a phase. Newlyweds, well, 4 years married. But still, figuring things out. I gave it time. But time was the one luxury Madison was entirely running out of. By May, the $700,000 was almost entirely gone. A boutique she'd invested in that turned out to be her sorority sister's failing candle company. A Range Rover lease. Designer everything. A wellness retreat in Sedona that cost more than some people's mortgages. And, this part still makes my jaw tight, $22,000 on a birthday party for herself. Her 31st birthday, not a milestone year by any math I know. Pierce told me later, long after everything had already fallen apart, that he'd actually tried to push back once. In private, weeks before any of this reached our kitchen counter. I told her we needed to slow down, he said. I told her that money was supposed to be our cushion, not our lifestyle. What'd she say? She said I was being dramatic. That we'd figure it out once we moved in with you guys, because then we wouldn't have rent or a mortgage weighing on us anymore. That sentence told me everything I needed to know about how long this plan had actually been in motion. It wasn't a last resort born out of desperation. It was the safety net they'd been counting on the entire time they were spending, which meant, in their minds, our house had already become collateral for decisions we'd never agreed to. Allison found out about most of the spending from Madison's own Instagram, scrolling through it one night at the breakfast bar while I read the paper. Ryan, she said, turning her phone toward me. Look at this. It was a video. Madison, champagne glass in hand, captioned, manifesting abundance after a hard year. We deserve this. Behind her, balloons spelling out her name. Gold ones. The expensive kind that actually hold their shape. A hard year, I repeated. She sold a house for $700,000 and calls it a hard year. There's more, Allison said quietly, and that's when she showed me the comment from Madison's sister Tiffany that said, "Girl, you better save some of that for when you guys move back in with his parents." L.O.L. That comment sat in my stomach for 2 days like a stone. She's already planning it, I said. She's planning to move into our house. Not the guest house. Our house. My gut instinct was entirely right, and the conversation that followed it would be the worst one of my life up to that point. Before that conversation happened, Allison did something I didn't find out about until much later. She called Madison directly, woman to woman, hoping to head the whole thing off before it ever caused a scene in our home. "Madison, sweetheart," Allison said. "Ryan and I love having you both close. But this house isn't a hotel, and it's definitely not a long-term plan. I just want us to be honest with each other before things go somewhere we can't walk back from. We're not trying to take advantage of anybody," Madison said, her tone sweet enough to curdle milk. "We just thought, since you guys have so much space, and since Pierce is your only son." "Since Pierce is your only son." "What?" Allison asked. "Nothing," Madison said quickly. "Forget it." Allison hadn't forgotten it. She hung up the phone, sat down across from me, and said one sentence that turned out to be more prophetic than either of us realized. "Ryan, I think she believes this house is supposed to be theirs eventually anyway." That entitlement was about to collide head-on with the one thing neither Pierce nor Madison had bothered to read before they spent a single dollar of that $700,000, the actual paperwork. It happened on a Sunday. I remember because Allison had made her signature soup, the one she only makes on Sundays, and the whole kitchen smelled like rosemary and garlic, and I remember thinking, right before everything fell apart, that it was a good day. Pierce and Madison came in from the guest house unannounced, sat down at our kitchen table like they'd called a meeting, and Madison started talking before either of them had even taken their coats off. "So we've been thinking," she said. "And honestly, the guest house just isn't working long term. It's small, the ack is loud, and Pierce keeps hitting his head on that low doorway." "It's a guest house, Madison," I said. "It's not built for long term." "Right, exactly," she said, smiling like I'd made her point for her, "which is why we think it makes more sense for us to move into the main house with you guys. You've got that whole upstairs wing you barely use." I set my coffee mug down slower than I wanted to. "You want to move into our house. The one Allison and I live in." "Temporarily," Pierce added, fast, like he was trying to soften something he already knew was a mistake. "For how long this time?" I asked. "Because last time temporary turned into a leased Range Rover and a trip to the Caribbean." Madison's smile cracked at the edges. "That's not fair." "What's not fair," I said, "is that you sold a house we helped you buy, spent $700,000 on yourselves, and now you want to move into the house my wife and I worked 30 years to pay off." "We're family," Madison said, her voice rising. "Family helps family. Isn't that what you always say? Family doesn't burn through their own future and then ask their parents to hand over theirs." The kitchen went quiet, except for the soup bubbling on the stove. I looked at Allison. She gave me the smallest nod, the kind of nod years of marriage teaches you to read perfectly. "Say it." "No," I said. "You're not moving into this house. Not now, not in 6 months, not ever, unless something drastically changes about how you two handle money and how you talk to us." Madison stood up so fast her chair tipped backward and clattered against the tile floor. "Are you serious right now?" "Dead serious. You have 6 bedrooms, Ryan." And there it was, my first name, thrown at me like a weapon, because apparently I'd lost the right to be called anything respectful. 6 bedrooms, and you're going to let your own son live in a glorified shed? "That shed has central air, a kitchen, and a bathroom bigger than my first apartment," I said. "And it's a roof. A roof you both apparently think you've outgrown after spending money that wasn't even fully yours to spend." That last part, wasn't even fully yours. I shouldn't have said it. Not because it wasn't true. Because of what happened next. Madison's face went red, then white. "What is that supposed to mean?" I didn't get the chance to answer. Her hand came across the table, and across my face, before I even saw her arm move. The sound of it is something I'll hear for the rest of my life. A flat, sharp crack, like a dropped plate, except it was my own cheek, and for one full second the kitchen just stopped. Allison's hand flew to her mouth. Pierce sat frozen, his mouth open, no words coming out. The soup kept bubbling like nothing in the world had happened, which felt almost insulting. My face was burning. My ears were ringing, just slightly, and underneath the shock, something cold and very, very still settled into my chest. "Pierce," I said, my voice quiet in a way that scared me more than shouting would have. "Get her out of my house." "Dad, now." What I failed to realize then was that I had just watched the final moments of our family, as we used to know it. They left within the hour. Madison sobbing something about how I'd provoked her. Pierce not meeting my eyes once. Allison sat with an ice pack pressed to my cheek, even though it was her hand that wanted to be doing something with that ice pack to somebody's face. Not mine. "Ryan," she said, "what are you going to do?" I already knew. I'd known since the sound of that slap was still hanging in the air. I called Kimberly, our trust attorney, first thing the next morning, before I'd even finished my coffee. "I need you to pull the trust documents," I told her. "Pierce's trust. I need to know exactly what that clause says, word for word." There was a pause on the line. "Ryan, is everything okay?" "No," I said. "Madison hit me yesterday. In my own kitchen." In front of Allison and Pierce, I heard Kimberly exhale slowly. "Are you all right?" "My pride's worse off than my face," I said. "But Kimberly, I want to know if that clause we wrote 8 years ago still does what I think it does." There was a sound of papers shuffling, a keyboard clicking. "Give me until this afternoon," she said. "But Ryan, off the record, if what you're describing happened the way you're describing it, you already know the answer." I called a second attorney that same morning, Sullivan, a criminal and family law specialist Kimberly had recommended years ago for exactly this kind of situation, the kind you pray you'll never need. Sullivan had a voice like gravel and zero patience for excuses, which is exactly what I wanted. Walk me through it, Sullivan said. I did. Every word, every detail, the slap, the witnesses, all of it. You have a witness, he said when I finished. Your wife. That's not nothing, Ryan, that's actually a lot. I want to press charges, I said. Simple assault, whatever the law calls it. I'm not letting this slide because she's family. Understood. I'll have a police report filed today, and we'll get a summons moving through the process this week. Georgia law doesn't care whose kitchen it happened in. What Madison failed to realize was that the summons I was setting in motion wasn't just a ticket to a courtroom. It was the key that would lock her out of our family's wealth forever. Kimberly called back that afternoon, and I could hear in her voice she'd found exactly what we both suspected. It's airtight, Ryan, she said. The violence clause applies to any beneficiary or spouse of a beneficiary. Madison qualifies as a spouse of a beneficiary. If she's formally charged, which a police report and criminal summons absolutely satisfies, the remaining trust corpus terminates immediately. How much are we talking about? I asked, even though some part of me already knew this wasn't really about the number. The original 700 was an early advance against the corpus, Kimberly said. What's left, unvested, still sitting in the trust, set to distribute when Pierce turns 40, is just over $2.1 million. Stocks, the lake house and Helen, and the remainder of the account. I sat down hard in my kitchen chair. 2.1 million. Correct. And per the contingent beneficiary clause you and Allison wrote in originally, it goes to Zoe, I said. Zoe is my granddaughter. 7 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, obsessed with horses, and slightly obsessed with telling everyone within earshot that she's going to be a veterinarian and an astronaut, in that order. She is, without a single ounce of exaggeration, the best thing that's come out of Pierce and Madison's marriage. It goes into an education and welfare trust for Zoe, Kimberly confirmed, administered by you and Allison until she turns 25. Pierce and Madison would have no access to it. None, not for tuition, not for a house, not for anything. I sat there a long moment, the late afternoon light coming gold through the kitchen window, the same window Madison had been standing in front of less than 24 hours earlier when she hit me. Do it, I said. File whatever needs filing. Trigger it. Ryan, Kimberly said, gently for someone usually so clinical, you understand once this moves forward, it's not something you can undo later if everyone calms down and apologizes. It's irrevocable. That's the whole point of the clause. I know exactly what irrevocable means, I said. I've had a few hours to think about whether I mean it. I mean it. 5 days later, the summons hit. I wasn't there when it happened. A process server showed up at the guest house on a Thursday morning while I was at work, but Allison watched it through the window, and she gave me the play-by-play that night, with something that looked almost like satisfaction underneath the seriousness of it all. Madison opened the door in her robe, Allison said. The server asked for her by name, handed her the envelope, and just left. She stood in the doorway reading it for I don't know how long. Then she started screaming for Pierce. The dominoes were falling faster than any of us anticipated, and the real damage was about to become blindingly obvious to them. Pierce called me 40 minutes later, his voice cracking in a way I hadn't heard since he was a teenager. Dad, what is this? A criminal summons? You're actually pressing charges? She hit me, Pierce. She was upset. People don't usually call the cops on family. People don't usually hit their family in the face either, I said. But here we are. Dad, please, this could follow her forever. A record, Dad. Do you understand what that does to someone? I understand exactly what getting hit in my own kitchen does to someone too, I said. I lived it. You watched it happen and didn't say a word. The line went silent except for his breathing. There's something else, I added, because I wasn't going to let him find out from a lawyer's letter instead of from me. This isn't just about the assault charge. The trust your mother and I set up for you, the one that helped buy that house you sold, it had a clause about violence against a grantor. By you, or your spouse. What kind of clause? The kind that means the rest of your inheritance, over $2 million, Pierce, just got redirected, away from you, into a trust for Zoe. The sound he made wasn't quite a word. It was somewhere between a gasp and a sob, the sound of a man watching a number disappear in real time. "You can't do that," he finally managed. "Dad, you can't." "I already did," I said. 8 years ago. I just didn't think I'd ever have to actually use it. 2 weeks before the court date, Madison showed up at our door alone. No Pierce, no warning, just her, standing on our porch in workout clothes like she'd rehearsed casual on the drive over. "Can we talk?" she asked. Allison let her in. I stayed standing in the living room, arms crossed, not offering her a seat. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," Madison said, "for what happened. It was a stressful time, and I reacted badly. And I know that's not an excuse, but—" "But?" I asked. "But I was hoping maybe, before this goes any further with the court thing, we could just handle it as a family. Privately, I'll apologize properly, we'll move past it, and maybe you could talk to your lawyer about dropping it." There it was. Not an apology. A negotiation wearing an apology's clothes. "Madison," I said, "did you come here because you're sorry? Or because you finally realized what these criminal charges are going to do to your future?" Her jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "Funny," I said. "That's the same thing you said to me right before you hit me." She left 20 minutes later without the answer she came for. Looking back on the sequence of events, that visit, the timing of it, 2 weeks before trial, after she and Pierce had clearly already talked to Cameron about damage control, was about to become Exhibit A in Sullivan's argument that this wasn't remorse. It was strategy. The court date came 6 weeks later, in a Fulton County courtroom that smelled like old carpet and stronger coffee than the kind I make at home. Madison showed up with her defense attorney, named Cameron, a young guy in an expensive suit who clearly thought this was a case about an overreacting father-in-law and a misunderstanding that got out of hand. Cameron tried the angle I half expected. Mr. Foster provoked the confrontation, he argued, by refusing reasonable housing assistance to family members in a moment of financial transition, creating an emotionally charged environment that led to an unfortunate but understandable reaction. Sullivan, my attorney, didn't even blink. He stood up, calm as a man discussing the weather, and laid it out plain. "There is no version of Georgia law," Sullivan said, "where declining to let 2 adults move into your private residence constitutes provocation for physical assault." My client said the word no in his own kitchen. That is not provocation. That is a boundary. What happened next was a crime, witnessed directly by my client's wife, who is prepared to testify. Cameron tried again. "Your Honor, my client was under significant emotional and financial strain. This was a single, isolated incident in an otherwise loving family relationship." "A single incident is still an incident, counsel," the judge said, not even looking up from her notes. "Strain doesn't transfer liability for a hand to a face." Cameron sat back down. I watched Madison lean over and whisper something to him, and whatever it was, his expression told me it wasn't helping his case. Allison did testify. She described it exactly the way it happened. The slap, the sound, the chair clattering, in a steady voice that didn't waver once, even when Madison started crying 2 rows behind her. The judge wasn't interested in theatrics. She reviewed the police report, heard Allison's testimony, noted Madison had no prior record, and handed down a sentence that included a fine, mandatory anger management classes, and a protective order keeping Madison a defined distance from our home for 2 years. It wasn't prison. I never expected prison, and frankly I never wanted it. I wanted something that actually mattered to people like Madison, and a criminal record paired with a court-documented act of violence mattered plenty, because of what it triggered next. Kimberly's letter went out the same week the verdict came down. Armed with the final court disposition and the initial police report, the documentation was absolute. The trust had officially terminated per its written terms. The lake house in Helen, the stock portfolio, the remaining $2.1 million corpus, every cent of it now belonged to a trust established for Zoe Foster, to be administered by Ryan and Allison Foster until she turned 25. Pierce showed up at our door 3 days after that letter landed. Not the guest house, our actual front door, which felt like its own kind of statement, like he finally understood the difference. "Dad," he said, eyes red, "we need to talk about Zoe's trust." "There has to be some way to." "There isn't," I said, before he could finish. Kimberly built it that way on purpose, years before any of this happened. It's not punishment, Pierce. It's protection. For Zoe. What about us? What are we supposed to do? You're supposed to figure it out, I said. The way every adult figures things out. You'll keep your jobs. You'll downsize. You'll learn, maybe for the first time in your marriage, what it feels like to live within your means instead of mine. She's my wife, Dad. I'm not asking you to leave her, I said. I'm telling you what's not coming back. The money's gone. The trust is gone. And honestly, Pierce, so is my patience. It's been 8 months now. Pierce and Madison rent a 2-bedroom apartment off Roswell Road, the kind of place that's perfectly fine, and absolutely nothing like the life Madison thought $700,000 was going to buy her forever. Madison completed her anger management classes. I know because the court required proof, and Sullivan made sure we got copies. I don't know if it changed anything in her. I've stopped wondering. Zoe doesn't know about any of the money yet. She's 7. She knows that her grandparents love her, that there's a fund that's going to help her become a veterinarian and an astronaut someday, and that's exactly as much as she needs to know right now. People ask me sometimes, usually Allison's sister, who can't resist bringing it up at every holiday, whether I regret triggering that clause, whether some small part of me wishes I'd let it go, smooth things over, kept the family whole the easy way. I don't. There's a version of this story where I swallow my pride, let them move in, watch Madison run through whatever's left of our retirement the same way she ran through that house money, and call it keeping the peace. I know people who've lived that version. It doesn't end well. It just ends slow, a little less dignity every year, a little more resentment, until the people who raised the kid become strangers paying rent in their own home. I chose the other ending. The one where a slap in my own kitchen cost the person who threw it more than she ever imagined. Not because I wanted revenge for revenge's sake, but because some lines, once crossed, don't get the courtesy of being uncrossed. I think about that Sunday sometimes. The soup, the rosemary, the 5 seconds of quiet before everything changed. I don't romanticize it. I don't pretend I wish I could go back and unsay the word no. If anything, I wish I'd said it months earlier. Back when the comments started piling up and the Range Rover showed up in the driveway, and every signal was telling me exactly who I was dealing with. Madison hit me once. It's the only swing she ever got. And the $2 million she thought was eventually coming her way? It's sitting safely in a trust, with my granddaughter's name on it, growing a little every single month. Completely, permanently, irrevocably out of her reach. Some debts get paid in money. Others get paid in consequences. Madison's just learning that the second kind doesn't come with a payment plan. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories.